well-deserved success of the Super Mario Bros. Movie is opening the door for possibilities of other films based on Nintendo's properties. There's just so much that fans would love to see being made out of their favorite childhood pastimes. But before I dive into the topic of this video, I gotta talk about Mario. This is a character that doesn't need introduction. Mario is everywhere. He is Nintendo's mascot and is the face of gaming in general. He has appeared in many games, including side projects. He's appeared in a few TV shows and has been in a feature film. 2 of them, actually. The first was released in 1993, and it was the first time a video game was being adapted to film in North America. But it looks completely different from the games and went for more of a Blade Runner vibe. It's laughable to say the least. When the movie first came out, it was a critical and commercial failure. Nowadays, it's pretty much hailed as a cult classic. Then, of course, recently, Nintendo's creative input has allowed for the Mario movie that fans have craved for a long time. It was about time they got it right, too. It looks like Mario, it sounds like Mario, and even feels like Mario. Fast-paced, eye-flying, fire-shooting action, accompanied by a great cast of vocal talent from Chris Pratt, Charlie Day, Anya Taylor-Joy, Jack Black, Keegan-Michael Key, Seth Rogen, and many more. Seriously, the performances in the movie were just so good that half the time I forget that I'm hearing the voices of celebrities. It broke many records. It became the biggest opening weekend for an animated movie, and so far, at the current moment, it is the highest grossing film based on a video game. So, it was definitely a big hit with moviegoers. With the well-deserved success, it would only be natural, as confirmed by Shigeru Miyamoto himself, that many other film adaptations of Nintendo's franchises would be on the horizon. Fans are excited to see movies based on Legend of Zelda, Metroid, Kirby. But then there's also this question, would Nintendo be only collaborating with Universal, or would they also be working with other companies? I know this for a fact, the Pokemon movies, both the anime and the live-action film in North America, Detective Pikachu, those are all under the license of Warner Brothers. So there's the possibility they could also be working with other studios for the film adaptations. Now, I know you guys are very excited to see more of Nintendo's franchises being adapted to film. You can expect a Legend of Zelda movie in the style of Lord of the Rings. You could see a Metroid movie in the style of Ridley Scott's Alien. But for me personally, there are 2 franchises in particular I would love to see being adapted to film. They are Punch-Out and Star Fox. I'm going to talk about each and share how I think they would work well as movies. I get to talk about, should it be a 1-movie deal or maybe a series of films? What medium would it be presented in? The type of style it would take on. It could be visual style, storytelling style, and of course the music. Just all those different elements, how I think it would be made. Anyway, so here we go. I'm going to start with Punch-Out since it's the older of the 2. Punch-Out started off as 2 arcade games released in 1984. There was Punch-Out and then Super Punch-Out. They both played pretty similarly with some slight differences, and they felt like 2 halves of one whole game. It was a boxing game unlike any other. Not just that, what made it unique for the time was its use of 2 screens, with the top screen being the stats, like your score, and how much time was remaining in the round, and the stamina meters. The bottom screen was like the action screen, where you're controlling the player, everything's happening. Actually, this gives me a reminder of what Nintendo would later do with the DS and the 3DS. How come Nintendo never made a Punch-Out game for the DS or 3DS so they can utilize the 2-screen feature? The way most people remember Punch-Out was on the NES. In its initial United States release, it was called Mike Tyson's Punch-Out, named after the famous boxer, because at the time, Mike Tyson was the undefeated heavyweight champion of the world. And as a bonus, at the end of the game, you got to face him as the final boss. But it was later re-released because Nintendo was losing the license to use Mike Tyson, so they had to recolor the Mike Tyson sprites and make a new character named Mr. Dream. And the game was simply called Punch-Out, or sometimes Punch-Out featuring Mr. Dream. This version of the NES game was what was used for all the Virtual Console releases and on Nintendo Switch Online. Later down the line, there was Super Punch-Out for the SNES. It was not as successful as the NES version, but it was still a good game on its own. It followed the style more of the arcade games than the NES version. But then came Punch-Out for the Wii. What a great way to bring back the classic feel of the NES version. What a brilliant game. It's like a classic, pretty much as close as classic as it could get. But since the Wii version was released in 2009, not much has been done with the franchise. In fact, the only involvement Punch-Out really has with Nintendo now is that Little Mac is a playable fighter in the Super Smash Bros. Series. Though in Super Smash Bros. Brawl, he started off as an assist trophy. Now, as far as how to make a Punch-Out movie goes, there's a few different approaches to this. Would it be a standalone film, or would it be a series of films? There are a few different ways to go about this, but it really depends on how you want the story to go. The Punch-Out series gives us many opponents from all around the world to give great comedic potential, but you've also got to think, how would it all come together? Of course, the whole movie can't all be just Little Mac fighting a bunch of international fighters and training in between, otherwise there's not enough substance. I'll get to that later. So, here are 3 possible ideas I have for how a Punch-Out story would translate to film. Number 1, it could be a standalone film to follow in line with the arcade games. In the first Punch-Out arcade game, there were 6 opponents. In Super Punch-Out, there were 5 opponents, which makes for a combined total of 11 fighters in the arcade games. But I don't think just one film should have the protagonist go through 11 bouts. Just pick a few opponents for Little Mac to fight, like maybe 4 or 5. Theoretically, you could have a montage of some of the other fights, but I think that would just be a bit limited, don't you think? But, you know, just have him go through a few fights, then he'd become the world champ. Number 2, it could be a trilogy of movies. Since the NES version, the fights were divided into 3 divisions: minor circuit, the major circuit, and the world circuit. And what I imagine in a trilogy, you can imagine where I'm going here. In each movie, Little Mac would conquer one of the 3 circuits, which contains of 3 or 4 fighters. You take on the minor circuit in the first film, the major circuit in the second, and the world circuit in the third. Now, would all 3 films be shot at the same time, like Lord of the Rings? Or would they be filmed separately with a break in between, like the Dark Knight trilogy? Honestly, that's up to the people making it, if it is getting made. But either way, it's another interesting idea brought to the table. Number 3, there is another possibility on how to make a trilogy of movies. In the Wii version, the career mode was split into 3 segments. First was Contender, where you fought your opponents one at a time until you became the world champ. The second is Title Defense, where you're fighting the same opponents again, except this time you have to defend your world champion title. And the last was Mac's Last Stand, where you fight a string of random opponents until you lose 3 times during this period, in which case Little Mac will retire. The problem with this is that a lot of extra writing would be required to make all 3 films compelling, because honestly, this is actually the least interesting idea of the 3 I presented. It could make for an emotional ending to see Little Mac retire, but I think I like the second idea best. a trilogy where in each film, Little Mac conquers one of the 3 circuits. Now that I've talked about potential ideas for the main focus, I want to talk about other aspects of what could put the movie together. Like, I'm talking what kind of visual style we'd be going for, the type of influence the story could take, and the music we'd expect to hear. Now, naturally, I personally think a Punch-Out film is best set in the 1980s, and of course, it would be set in New York. But would the film be live action or animated? With live action, it could give a sense of tangibility, but with animation, it can use cartoony visuals that match up to the games. So really, either medium can work just fine. As for how the story itself would go, I'd imagine it'd be taking influence from the Rocky films, maybe even a bit from Raging Bull, a film I haven't seen. Now, a piece of trivia I do know is that the title music in the NES version uses a rendition of the Look Sharp Be Sharp March composed by Malin Marek. Apparently this same composition was even used in Raging Bull. Again, I haven't seen that movie. Anyway, of course we're gonna want to implement some backstory to Little Mac, because think back to when he was first introduced in Mike Tyson's Punch-Out. All we really knew about him was that he was a determined teenager who seeks great challenge. He meets a former heavyweight boxing champion by chance. He is trained to fight in the professional leagues, and the rest is history. If you wanted to bring in some product placement, you could make McDonald's references regarding Little Mac's name, because, Little Mac, Big Mac. Maybe he could be working part-time at McDonald's, and that's where he got the name. But being serious, I wouldn't really want there being product placement. As far as how Little Mac's backstory would go, I think one of the best ways to go about it is that Little Mac is an orphan. As cliche as that idea sounds, it actually makes sense if you think about the relationship between Little Mac and Doc Lewis, his trainer and coach. Doc Lewis treats Little Mac as though he were his own son, and when training him, he's providing him with the wisdom he learned from his days as a heavyweight boxing champ. The way I like to see it, Little Mac lived most of his life in an orphanage. He was the subject of ridicule. He was mockingly given the nickname Little Mac. And one day, Doc sees him trying to fight back during his preteen years. Doc adopts Mac to raise as his own and to teach him boxing. And now, as a 17-year-old, Mac enters the professional leagues. Now, along with the whole boxing plot, the movie's going to have to do what the Rocky films did and give Mac a plot within his personal life. It could be he's in a romantic relationship, he could be trying to have father-son bonds with Doc Lewis, or something, just anything to give substance to his personal life within the film. Of course, it's all going to need to tie in with the boxing plot that audiences are the most interested in. If written well, a Punch-Out movie can make for a compelling story, filled with emotions, sportsmanship, and comedy. Lastly, I want to talk about the music. I'd expect a lot of music cues to be taken from the games, especially from the NES version with the fight music and the training montage. Both sequence, it's not really much of a montage. In the Wii version it's a montage, but it's really just a sequence in the NES version. You get the idea. But I'd also like to hear music coming from the SNES version. I know the music in that game isn't as memorable, but come on, it's still from Punch-Out. And, you gotta have some variety in there. And the training sequences, they could be a great tribute to the Rocky films, even if it's not gonna use the song Gonna Fly Now, unless, you want to. I prefer if they used a rendition of the training music from the NES version. And also, since I imagine the film being set in the 80s, there would be some licensed 80s songs in there as well. Overall, I love the Punch-Out games. I think they could be great films too. Think of the wacky comedy that could go into it, the connection between Little Mac and Doc Lewis, and the portrayal of the international fighters. I'm confident that it could do the franchise justice. Now let's talk about Star Fox. The franchise began in 1993 with the release of the SNES game. It made use of the Super Effects chip, which allowed for polygonal graphics. Today, it doesn't exactly age like fine wine, the graphics anyway. The gameplay is still very fun. You fly through each stage, blasting enemies, you even blow the enemy bosses away. So much fun. Star Fox 64, released in 1997 for the Nintendo 64, was often deemed the best game in the series. It's definitely my favorite N64 game. It's just so much improved from its predecessor. The graphics, the music, the gameplay, the missions. It's just so much that was just mind-blowing, especially back in the day. There are especially so many memorable quotes. Seriously, just try to search on the internet for famous video game quotes, and you're bound to come across at least a few from Star Fox 64. But then after Star Fox 64, the franchise went on kind of a bumpy road. Star Fox Adventures, Star Fox Assault, Star Fox Command. None of those games were as well thought of as Star Fox 64. It's got those repeated issues, kinda, like terrible voice acting, sudden departure from its predecessors, clunky controls, convoluted story. We were getting off track. But then with Star Fox Zero releasing in 2016, you'd think it would set the franchise right again, but it looked like it could have been an amazing game. It looked like an amazing game, but the controls were what ruined it. I've already made a Media Dodger episode about Star Fox 64. Not 64, Zero. 64 is a good game, amazing game. Star Fox Zero, it could have been another amazing game, but the controls just ruined the whole thing. Since then, aside from the official release of the initially canceled Star Fox 2 on the SNES Classic and on the Nintendo Switch Online, there hasn't really been much done with the series. Well, except for maybe the Star Fox crossover with the game Starlink Battle for Atlas, though it was only a Nintendo Switch exclusive. I haven't played the game yet, but I heard that the inclusion of Star Fox makes it all worth it. But other than that, the most involvement Nintendo really gives Star Fox is the use of playable characters and stages in the Super Smash Bros. Series. So, how about that film adaptation? Should it be a standalone movie? Well, for a simple question, you get a simple answer. No, absolutely not. Star Fox has a big galaxy to explore. Having just one film wouldn't do it justice. What I think it should be is a trilogy of films taking influence from the classic Star Wars trilogy. Also, live action or animated. Are you for real? It should be animated. One of the most obvious things to do with this one is to borrow story elements from Star Fox 64, since that game has the best described background for the whole story, you know? Like, the mad scientist Andros. He was banished from the planet Corneria after his experiments have gone haywire and threatened people's lives. And 5 years after the exile, the team Star Fox, led by James McCloud, was investigating Venom for suspicious activity. And then Pigma Dengar ends up betraying the team, leading them to a trap that was devised by Andros. And during the escape, James sacrifices himself so his friend Peppy Hare can escape back to Corneria and spread the bad news. And soon enough, Andros declares war on the Lilat system, with Corneria being his main target. And so, it is up to a new Star Fox team, led by Jameson Fox, to defend the Lilat system and defeat Andros. Yeah, the Star Fox franchise doesn't really have a lot of games in it, but there's still plenty of material to work with if you want to talk about story elements and the missions in the games. You can have a level based on the train chase on Macbeth. There's defending the base on Katina, and rescuing a fellow squad mate on Titania, and many more. And of course, you're going to want to take it a little at a time. If written well, you can have plenty of ideas across 3 films and still have a very cohesive story. The character development is one of the more important elements. We already got the personalities down. Fox is the fearless leader, Falco is the arrogant hotshot, Slippy is the accident-prone mechanic, and Peppy is the wise mentor. These characters, along with several others, would need 3 dimensions in order for them to be, likable characters in the film adaptation. We should also expand on many of the character elements like the friendly rivalry between Fox and Falco, the connection that Fox has with Peppy through his dead father, and then of course the connection that Andross and General Pepper once had before Andross was banished, and the exile for all these years has made Andross very bitter and hungry for revenge, making an adversary out of General Pepper. Of course, it's based on a series of video games that doesn't really give much of a structured plot, even if there were attempts like in Star Fox Assault and Star Fox Command. There would have to be plenty of liberties taken to make a compelling story. They could have to add new characters, and maybe even characters from other Star Fox media that never appeared in any of the video games. Like Nintendo Power had a series of comics featuring a new character named Farrah Phoenix, who becomes a 5th member of the team. She never appeared in any of the games. It would be nice to see her appear in one of the movies. Then there's the manga Farewell Beloved Falco, which explains why in Star Fox Adventures you don't see Falco until near the end of the game. Captain Shears was a pretty cool antagonist in that manga, and it would be nice to see him implemented as maybe a side villain in one of the movies. So they definitely got plenty of ideas on the table if they ever follow through with a Star Fox adaptation. Though I'm not really a fan of the idea of Falco momentarily leaving the team only to come back way later. Honestly, that just doesn't sit well with me. I mean, he's my favorite character, and it's nice to see some form of development, but I don't really think that's the right way to do it. Lastly, there's the music. I'm sure a lot of you would expect the score to be orchestrated to match up with the style of the music since Star Fox 64. But let's also remember that in the original game on SNES, it had some rockin' tunes for its soundtrack. Seriously, the first level in the game has one of the best music tracks in video game history, especially in the 16-bit era. So, the way I would like to have the score handled in a Star Fox movie would be for it to be a mix of orchestra and heavy rock. But if it's all orchestrated, I'm okay with that too. Overall, I've got a big hankering for a Star Fox adaptation. I really think there's a lot of potential in the idea. I really think it should happen. In fact, it could blow away the modern Star Wars crap that we keep getting from Disney. I can't believe it. Taking influence from Star Wars just to tell Star Wars, hey, watch the birdie! Yeah, that should be like the storytelling style of the movies. Like Star Wars meets Top Gun. That's how it should be, in a nutshell. Well, that's all I have to say about Nintendo franchises I would like to see being adapted for feature film. Now, Nintendo's got plenty of good franchises that could work just as well in feature film. Of course, we all know that the Super Mario Bros. Movie is definitely going to get a sequel sometime later, but let's also remember that Mario is not the only franchise by Nintendo. Now, aside from the obvious ones like Legend of Zelda, Metroid, or Pokemon, what Nintendo franchises would you especially love to see being adapted to film, and how would you imagine it getting made? Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.